Charles Darwin was born in 1809 in England, and in Cambridge he studied theology. He was preparing for a job as a country clergyman, but a particular type of country clergyman, because in his spare time he was collecting beetles and he was doing some small natural history projects. Now in 1831, there's something interesting happened. Darwin was 22 years old, and his botany professor, John Henslow, received a letter from the Royal Navy. Now, a survey ship called HMS Beagle was preparing for a long voyage, and the captain of the ship wanted a naturalist on board. Now, Henslow, of course, recommended his best student, Darwin, for this position. Now, after a few weeks of family dramas and hesitation, Darwin finally accepted, and in December 1831, the Beagle left Plymouth in the south of England for South America. Now, the original plan was just a 2-year survey of the coast of South America, but the mission grew, and the voyage lasted about 5 years until 1836. Now, during those years, Darwin spent a lot of time on land, not just on the ship. He did all sorts of crazy things, like riding with gauchos in Patagonia, or crossing the Andes in Chile, or collecting fossils and plants in Brazil. He also visited many other places, like the Galápagos Island, Tahiti, New Zealand, Australia, and so on. And it's only in 1836 that he went back to England. Now, Darwin often felt miserable at sea because he suffered from chronic seasicknesses, but on land he was doing very well. He was in his element. He was walking, he was observing, he was collecting specimens, he was filling notebooks. Now, in his cabins he was also reading a lot of scientific books. In one of these books, Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology, which argued that slow gradual processes acting over a very long period of time can change mountains and coastlines, was very interesting for Charles Darwin. Now, this idea of small changes that over a long period of time can have an influence, a strong influence over the landscape, of course stuck in his head. Years later, these travel diaries were published by Darwin in a book called The Voyage of the Beagle. However, already during the voyage, he was building a huge archive of observations. Now, one group of these observations from a small island chain on the Galápagos turned out to be especially important. So what Darwin found out in the Galápagos was that while he was collecting a series of small birds that later became famous as Darwin finches, he noticed some interesting patterns in these birds. So here you can see a representation of 4 types of those birds, represented here with the Latin scientific name of Geospiza. As you can see, they are more or less similar in body shape. They are also similar in color. They are all of them kind of brownish. And they have the same body structure, the same body shape. But now the interesting thing is that if you focus on the beaks, you of course notice some major differences here. In particular, if we start from the finches on the left side in this picture, you will notice that they have large, strong, powerful beaks, that they look like small nutcrackers almost. They're actually very good for cracking our seeds. Now instead, if you focus on the finches on the right side, you will notice that instead they have long, thin, delicate beaks, that they are useful for picking insects, for instance, or for probing cactus flowers. So Darwin started to notice a pattern here, right? Different islands in the Galápagos tended to have different combination of these finches, and the local beak shapes seems to match the main food source available on each one of these islands. So different islands, different finches, different beak type. Now at the time, Darwin did not immediately realize what he had found. But when he went back to England in 1836, he went to an ornithologist, John Gould, and he showed his specimens to him. Now John Gould immediately noticed that these different finches, they were not just a few varieties of one bird. There were several distinct species, but they were all closely related to each other, and they were also closely related to finches on the South American mainland. This raised a deep question in Darwin's mind. Now, if these birds are also similar, and they resemble mainland finches, could they have descended from a single ancestral species that perhaps arrived on these islands in the Galápagos long time ago? Now, once those ancestors spread across the different islands, maybe each population would experience different conditions, like different foods, different predators, different climates. And over many generations, maybe the beaks could drift and adapt in these different directions. Now, of course, today we call this particular process adaptive radiation. One ancestral species diverging into many other species, each one specialized for a particular ecological niche. Now, for Darwin, these finches were one piece of a bigger puzzle. He started to suspect that species are not fixed, that given enough time, variation, isolation, one species could split into several other species. But of course, he didn't rush to publish. Actually, it took more than 20 years before he finally put his theory into a single book. All right. Then, after returning to England in 1836, Darwin, as we say, did not publish immediately a book about his finding, but instead he spent years analyzing his collections, corresponding with other scientists, filling private notebooks. In 1837, he also began a series of transmutation notebooks, where he started to sketch the famous tree of life diagram that you can see represented here. And by the early 1840s, he had already drafted a confidential essay laying out his ideas about how species changes. And he even left instruction that this essay should have been published if he had died unexpectedly. But he still didn't feel ready to release a full book about these topics to the public. However, in 1858, something happened. Another naturalist, Alfred Russel Wallace, who was working in the Malay archipelago, wrote a letter to Darwin. Now, inside the letter, there was an essay that described a mechanism for the origin of the species that was essentially the same as Darwin's own theory of natural selection. Now, to avoid a priority dispute, Darwin's colleagues arranged a joint presentation at the Linnean Society in London, where extracts from both Darwin's writings and Wallace's essay were read together, side by side. Now, this was the first public announcement of this shared idea. After that, Darwin finally sat down and decided, okay, this is the moment to write a book. And over about 13 months, more or less, he condensed these huge notes that he had into a single long argument. And the result was this book, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. Now, the central logic of the book can be summarized in 4 different steps that I'm going now to explain one by one. So, the first step of the book is variation. Variation. Individuals in a population are not identical, okay? They differ in many, many ways, like big size, color, speed, resistance to diseases, and so on. The second element is overproduction. Overproduction. What does it mean, overproduction? It means that organisms tend to produce more offspring than the environment can support. Now, this means that not every offspring has the possibility to survive and to reproduce. Third, we have struggle for existence, because resources are limited. Individuals have to compete. They have to compete for food, for mates, for hiding places, and they also have to face predators. They have to face harsh weather. Now, the fourth and last point, main point of the book, was, of course, natural selection. If some of those small inherited differences make it even slightly easier to survive and to reproduce, of course, in a given environment, then over many generations, the descendants of these initial individuals will become more common in the environment. This means that gradually the population is going to drift, to change. And Darwin called this process descent with modification. Now, this book, The Origin of Species, talks about plants and animals in general. And Darwin on purpose avoided to go too much into details about humans because, as you can imagine, it was a bit of a controversial topic. But it was obvious to many readers of the time that if this theory was correct and it applies to animals and plants, then by logic it should eventually apply also to our own species. The reaction was the following. Now, these cartoons come from newspapers and magazines of the time, and they show how the idea of Darwin leaked out of these scientific circles into the popular culture. Now, artists love to draw Darwin on the body of a monkey or some other creatures, like for instance, you can see on the right the body of a worm. Now, one well-known cartoons, the one on the left side here, represents Darwin with the body of a monkey, holding a mirror and sitting nearby another monkey looking into the mirror. Now, many of these images play on what journalists of the time called the monkey theory. And the journalists just turn this subtle claim that humans and other primates share common ancestors into one crude slogan: man comes from monkey. Now, Darwin's actual position was much more careful, of course. He argued that humans and modern apes are like cousins, that we share an early ancestor, but we are not literally descending from the chimpanzees, right? But still, back in the day, in the Victorian age, the idea that humans were part of the same natural process as animals was deeply unsettling. Now, these cartoons, of course, exaggerate this discomfort. They suggest that if you accept evolution, then you must accept also that you are a kind of an animal, right? You are stripped down of any spatial separate origin. And this, of course, was also a threat to religious beliefs that we were created by God. And for others, all the situation was simply funny or provocative. Now, what's interesting about this is that the existence of these cartoons show how powerful Darwin's idea really was. People were arguing about it, joking about it, and using it in political and religious debates. So the theory of evolution was no longer just a technical proposal. It became part of the broader conversation about what it means to be human. Now, more than a century later, we are going to do something that Darwin himself probably never imagined. We will take the logic of variation and selection, and we are going to use it as a tool inside our computers. Now, all the methods listed in the box on the right, they belong to what we call evolutionary methods or evolutionary algorithms. Now, the idea here is simple. We are going to take Darwin's recipe of variation, selection, and inheritance, and we're going to turn it into a general purpose search strategy. Now, instead of evolving animals, we are going to evolve a candidate solution to a problem. And we are going to use the loop that you can see on the left side here. Now, we maintain a population of candidate solution. Then for each one, we are going to compute a fitness function that is going to give us a fitness score. And then we are going to select the best candidates. And from the best candidates, we are going to create some offsprings, new solutions. We are going to do it through some operators like mutation and recombination. Now, each method in the box on the right side use a variation of this general idea, and but with different choices about how to represent a solution, how to apply variation, and so on. Now we can do a quick tour of each one of these methods. Let's start with genetic algorithms that are probably the most famous of all these methods here. Now, genetic algorithms are the classic example here. Each individual is usually a fixed length sequence, an array of vector. Originally, they were vector of zeros and ones, so a string of bits. But today, they are also used as vector of numbers, vector of symbols, and so on. So we are going to evaluate the fitness on each one of these strings, of these arrays. We are going to select the best ones, and we are going to make new strings using some operators like crossover, where we are going to take two parents, we are going to splice them, and we are going to piece together the pieces to create an offspring. We can also use another operator that is called mutation, where we simply are going to flip one of the bits of the array to generate a mutation. And this will lead to also to an offspring, a new offspring that is different from the parents. Now, if we repeat this process over time, we will also get the emergence of useful patterns. And this will be similar to genes, for instance, that are going to spread through the population. Then we have evolution strategies. Now, evolution strategies were developed mainly for engineering optimization. And in an evolution strategy, each individual is a vector of real numbers, representing, for example, some design parameters. Now, mutation in this particular case means that we are going to add random noise to these numbers. Oftentimes, we are going to use Gaussian distribution. And a nice twist here is that the algorithm can also evolve the size of the mutations. So this means that it can automatically adjust how broadly it searches and it goes along during this process. Now, this makes evolution strategies very good at continuous optimization, and in particular when we do not have gradients. Then we have differential evolution. This is another method used for continuous problems, and it also represents individuals as real value vectors, but the way these individuals are mutated is different. The idea is pretty simple. To create a new candidate, we are going to take the difference between two other individuals in the population. So we take the two vectors, we're going to take the difference between these two vectors. Then we are going to scale this difference, and then we are going to add it to a base vector. Now, this different base mutation tends to balance very well exploration and exploitation. And this is why differential evolution is often used as a practical and off-the-shelf optimizer. Then we have genetic programming. Now, in genetic programming, the individuals are not just vectors, they are programs. We often represent each program as a tree. We have internal nodes that are functions like plus, minus, sine, cosine, and so on. And we have leaves that are inputs or constants. The fitness in this particular case is going to measure how well the program is going to perform on a given task. For example, how well we are going to fit a specific dataset. And here the crossover is going to swap subtraits and between parents, of course, and the mutation is just going to change a function or is going to change a constant. Now, in this way, the population is going to explore the space of all possible programs within the manifold. Now, gene expression programming is combining ideas from genetic algorithms and genetic programming. Each individual here has a fixed length linear chromosome, like in genetic algorithm, but the chromosome is decoded or expressed as a tree-shaped program, like in genetic programming. Now, separating the genome from the expressed structure make it easier to apply genetic operator here. And finally, we have neuroevolution. In Neuroevolution, we are going to apply evolutionary algorithms to neural networks. Here, each individual solution may represent just the weights of a neural network or the structure, the architecture of a neural network. For instance, the number of layers or how the neurons are connected and so on. Now, the fitness of a network is simply how well this network performs on a given task. This could be when we are using a policy, the network as a policy. It could be how well it's playing a game or controlling a robot. And in classification and regression, it could be how well it's making predictions. Now, instead of using gradient descent and backpropagation, we can rely just on selection, mutation, recombination, and so on. So this means that these type of methods are particularly useful where we cannot differentiate, when the function is not differentiable or when some elements of the network itself are not differentiable. So in all these cases, we can use Neuroevolution instead of backpropagation. All right, so the overall picture here is the following. Darwin developed a theory to explain how real population of organisms can change over time. And then later on, computer scientists took the same logic and turned it into a sort of family of evolutionary methods for problem solving. Now in the next video, I suggest to take one of those methods and just look at this method a bit more closely and see how we can use it for solving real world problems. So if you like this video, put a like, subscribe to the channel, and give a video a thumbs up, of course. And also consider joining the Sapiente community for free, completely for free. I'm sharing there the notes of these lessons. We can have a chat. We can share some ideas. Let's try to grow the community. And thank you for watching. I will see you next time.